This evening, our hearts will turn toward the eternal presence, and we will go backward in time into the eternal consciousness, and we will think of the moment of creation, of the vastness of creation. We find in the Sanskrit tongue the word kal, which means time, and the word desh, which means space. We will think then in terms of time and space, as though time and space were a little gentle bubble beneath the great hovering consciousness of God. We will realize, however, that in this bubble, in this heart of space, where all things exist, are great beauty. A beauty that oftentimes cannot be described adequately by our words or even by our thought. We may grasp for a moment all of this, and it is incomprehensible to us because it extends too far and is too great. Yet there is a relativity in it all, and our relationship equates, or our relationship is established more with our own sphere and our own circle of friends and those that we feel are near and dear to us. Yet other sheep I have, the Master said, which are not of this fold. Them too I will bring with me. So we should understand that in the consciousness of the Christ is a spirit of gathering together rather than tearing apart and creating a feeling of sundering or shattering, which so often is the case in the world today. Let us recognize then this tremendous depth of the wonder of God's love, a love that is not only now, but always has been and always will be, a love that, if we can escape from the densities of this world, will enable us to find a freedom that we have never known before. A freedom in consciousness, a freedom in our being, a dominion that we can take over our physical bodies, over our consciousness, over our mind, over our heart, and over all things that are around us, because all these things belong unto the heart of God, and they are God's. But they are also ours because He has said, I will prepare a place for you, that where I am, there ye may be also. And so we begin to develop a sense of not only the love of God, but the extension of God, or the permeation of God through the universe. Somehow or other we have failed to think in terms of what the Masters have called hallowing space. Space was intended to be hallowed, not desecrated. And the hallowing of space is accomplished by the absorption, as a blotter absorbs ink. So we find that the consciousness can be imbued or penetrated by the consciousness of God. And in this penetration comes a greater awareness of where we are. We see both the world of the microscopic and we see the world of the telescopic. And we recognize that there is a greater largesse of heart in the universe than we have thought, because we have seen mirrored in the faces of people around us. We have seen limitation, the limitation of a sense of sin, the limitation of a sense of smallness and largeness, of size, of economic importance. We have allowed these things to penetrate our consciousness, and many of us have been concerned in the past with a sense of worldly fun. Is it fun? Well, then we are now going to take a new look at another idea, and that is it fun to do the will of God? Is it fun to do the will of God? Is it possible that the chairman of the board of the universe can have better ideas than Ford? Can the glow of the cosmic sense be ingested by man? Can he realize what it means? Can God come down to us and show us our own worth, a worth that is inherent within us? This love is God. This love is ours. We belong to that love. And that love is dynamic. That love is not cheap. It is not vulgar. It is not unsustaining. unmagnetic. It is magnetic and drawing. It reaches out the power of God through the whole universe. And that is what all of us possess as a germinal spark within us. Today, unfortunately, we live in a world of sham. A world where people dare to pull the strings on other people, and we have seen the world compartmented and splintered and shattered in its wholeness. And all of this creates degeneration. Now we have the factor of degeneration, we have the factor of generation, where people are born and die, and we have the factor of regeneration, where people find the great power of immortal life. Of ourselves we can do nothing, but through Christ we can do all things. We are dealing with a universal Christ. We are not dealing with a figment of our imagination. The life that beats our heart is no transient tramp that passes through and then is no more. True, ships may pass in the night, but we are concerned with that which we will call the contact with God. Contact with God. God is a spirit, I read, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. This is regeneration. This is a tremendous factor. Now, if you come out here into this place, as Jesus Christ said, he says, when ye went out, he said, what did ye go out to see? A reed shaken by the wind? He said, nay, more than a reed. And so we should understand that our message we bring to you tonight is not a message of our personal attainment. We have no desire in this activity to try to bring grandiose ideas to any man. The Guru is God, and the Guru works through the hierarchy of the brotherhood. And the hierarchy, these beloved masters of attainment, walked also in our shoes. They lived here, they sweat, they toiled, they struggled. Yet they have attained. And because they have attained, we shall also attain, if we follow in their footsteps. I recall when I stood in Rome and placed my hands in the place where Jesus appeared to St. Peter, I felt, and I do have, by God's grace, the power of sensitivity, of feeling and discerning what spirits are. And as I placed my hands in these supposed footprints of the Christ, carved into the rock, this being a replica of the genuine which was locked up, as I placed my fingers in that spot, which was on the same locale in Rome, I was amazed at the tremendous charge that passed through my fingertips and up into my body, as though I had plugged my fingers into an electrical socket. This was energy, and it was not energy that was imaginative. It was genuine spiritual energy, and that is exactly the kind of energy that the masters bring to you and to me, and the kind of energy that will free mankind. Today we are living in a time of puppetry and idolatry. Idolatry where people live in a manner of worshiping the things that they desire to worship without understanding the presence of God. The love of God seems to have evaporated somewhere in the marketplaces of life. It seems to have flown. And so everything is commercialized. And everything carries the idea of how much money can I make? But you're not going to see any plate passed here. We don't pass it. Yet God supplies our every need because he is God. And he is able to supply not only the physical needs of man, but we can go unencumbered through the universe, taking neither purse nor scrip. It doesn't matter, because God is God and he is with us. And he is with all mankind, but somehow or other the love of God has been distorted in the consciousness of men. It's as though they had put on a pair of Polaroid glasses and then were gazing at a screen with only half of the picture. Half of the picture is there. And what does that half tell us? It tells us of wars and rumors of wars and of earthquakes. It tells us of the greatest motion picture that's going to be shown on the local screen. It tells us of the pornography that we find in the marketplaces. It tells us of the distortions of man's inhumanity to man. But it does not show us the way of raising our consciousness. And that is necessary. In one sense of the word, we find that man, unregenerate, ordinary man, finds himself to be a bit of a disobedient child. He may not know, but do you know something? We have a saying in common law, in ordinary American jurisprudence, we say that ignorance of the law is no excuse. Yet somehow or other God has been painted as a God that is most anxious to somehow or other impale us upon a stick and then toast us as a marshmallow. I don't believe this. I believe that God is a God of love. I believe that He is a God of exactness, that as I give my energy out into the universe, so that energy will return to me. What I send out as I treat my fellow men, as I treat my God, as I treat all of life and the wondrous opportunity, so will it return to me. What I have done. Life is a boomerang or a cornucopia. A boomerang if we send out bad energy, a cornucopia of abundance, of the abundant life, a great stimulation of consciousness if we send out the vibration into the world of hope and light and beauty and strength. The outer garments we wear are meaningless. They could be rags or they could be beautifully tailored. It doesn't make any difference. Our outer garments are a sham unless we have something within our heart that is regenerative. What does it say in the Bible? It says, they shall say, Christ is here, and Christ is there. Go not, for the kingdom of heaven is within you. I have known any number of great preachers in my life, men of the cloth who go out here and tell the public how great they are. How great they are. But have failed to recognize the greatness that is in their congregation and in the masses of the people. It is a greatness that is spread amongst us. Do you realize that? Then try to realize it. Try to grasp it. We are not dealing with a principle where you have 1,000 religions, 1,000 creeds, is one a rose, the rest all weeds. That's not the idea. You are dealing with the Spirit, and the Spirit is most holy. I realize that many people pin their faith on the great acts that people do. In the land of India, where we have journeyed to and where we mingled and rubbed elbows with the great devotees and gurus of India, never knowing sometimes whose hand we might be touching, we observed that there were many fakers. We observed that there were many people who just put on, but every once in a while we found one who could do everything that you might imagine. And of course, the first thing you would imagine is this great guru who can pull flowers out of the air, change literally almost water into wine, and do all kinds of things, maybe pull out a lingam out of his mouth and all these things. You say to yourself right away, this man or this woman must be great because they can perform miracles. And somehow or other, humanity today is as easily fooled as they were in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. And I did not say that there were not great men and there were not men that could perform miracles. I am trying to get across to you the idea that the Great White Brotherhood does not today stress miracles or manifestation or phenomena. That is not the activity of the Masters today. The Masters believe in the manifestation of the sign of the prophet Jonah, that as Jonah was in the whale's belly 3 days and 3 nights, even so the Son of Man shall be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights, which is symbolical of the manifestation of the Christ in the heart of man, the 3 days and 3 nights having no reference whatsoever to our sense of days, for 1 day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as 1 day. It is a symbolical statement as the Master, through the woman, hid this in 3 measures of meal. So we have to understand that the Bible is filled with symbology. And this is one of the reasons why people get so disturbed, is because they think they have it all figured out. They understand all the mysteries of life. They know all about everything, and then suddenly they find out that all of this is knocked into a cocktail. Why? It becomes more or less meaningless, because new discoveries take precedence. And so religion ought to be progressive. Contact with God ought to denote progress, and it does. Now, one of the things that fools so many people is the pulling of rabbits out of the air, if you know what I mean. In other words, doing something phenomenal. If somebody can get up and perform a miracle, then people say, I'll follow that man. Go not. Don't follow people for miracles. Even though we are able to do miracles, we do not do miracles. Not in the outer sense of miracles. Yes, they have been done here, and they are done right along. But they don't generally appear in an ordinary manner. They don't generally appear as a physical manifestation. I remember several years ago standing in Washington, D.C. when we were taking a dictation from one of the great masters. I think this one was Paolo Veronese, or the great master Paul the Venetian over here. And suddenly one of the ladies in the audience began to observe that it was not I that was standing on the platform. She noticed that my face completely changed, and she thought she was going crazy. And she said, "What's happening to me? Why am I seeing this?" And I had a beard and a mustache and everything. And at that time I wore neither. You see. And so all of these things were very strange to her. Now this type of miracle can occur. This type of observation can happen. It does sometimes. But that is not important either. What is important is our own personal measure of attunement, the elevation of our consciousness, the recognition of the Christ in ourselves, and if in ourselves, then he must be in all men, because we are all derived from the same source. Is this not true? I have never known anyone that did not come from the same source. I doubt if you will either. It doesn't matter. But people somehow or other are interested in flying saucers. I didn't say that they don't exist. All kinds of things may exist that we don't know anything about. But the point is, people say, well, I'm interested in other parts of the universe. That's what I'm interested in. But why not be interested in right where you are? I remember the song when I was a child. Brighten the corner where you are. And somehow or other, if we start brightening it, and sometimes in these days it gets pretty dull, well, I think it might really help out, you see, if we could brighten the corner where we are. But you know, everybody thinks it's going to be done with television or an extravaganza, or one of the great preachers like Oral Roberts or Billy Graham or one of these men. They're going to get out and do it all. Well, you know, God is not a failure. And he's been around a long time. Yet somehow or other people are continuing to make mistakes. Why? Because they have free will and they misuse it. That's the answer. And it's the only answer. Well, someone says, why doesn't God appear and forbid this or forbid that? Why doesn't he appear and say? He does. He does through his laws. People are born in one lifetime, and they do wrong things or right things, as the case may be. And then another lifetime comes along, and circumstances either become good or bad. And they say, why? Why did God do this? It isn't God that did it. We ourselves did it. And we did it because we misused our free will, or we used it properly. We still can. The option is ours. We are the ones that have to decide. And I would like tonight to take one of the great mysteries of the brotherhood and expound it to you for a moment. It will not take me long to reveal this mystery. It was called a lesser mystery of the brotherhood. And yet I deem it one of the most important, because when it was taken out of the scriptures and was twisted into the doctrines of the Christian church many, many hundreds of years ago, at that time an entire different happenstance occurred, whereby people started to do wrong on the strength of the misuse of this law. Now I'll explain it to you. You know what a pig is, don't you? Well, just imagine Simple Simon on top of the pig. And I'm going to explain the law of karma to you as you probably have never heard it explained before. Here we have the pig. And what is the pig now? Well, the pig is going to be a part of our karma. And Simple Simon writing it is another part of our karma, because we're dealing with a dual part of our karma according to the lesser mysteries. And this matter involves the ritual of forgiveness of sins. All the time, from the time of Christ and even before Christ, people had guilt senses. People still do. And in these guilt senses, they seek what? Forgiveness of sins. Where do they seek it? From God or someone greater? No, there is none greater. So where do they seek it? From God. But do they seek it from someone smaller than God? Yes. Because Jesus Christ gave the power to forgive sins to certain people in the church among his disciples. And they transferred that authority down through history. So then, we're dealing now with the pig. That's the forgiveness of sins. Now, Simple Simon's on top. And what is Simple Simon? Is he the fool? Well, simple Simon is the idea that you can kick a man and then go up to the man afterward and say to that man, will you forgive me? And he says, of course I will. I realize that you did wrong, but I'll forgive you. And then you turn to God and you say to God, will you forgive me? And God says, yes, I forgive you. And so you feel very forgiven, and the pig is no more. But simple Simon is still there. The one who rode the pig, piggyback. And you know who simple Simon is? That is the wrong act, the injustice that was done by the kick. And this is the big mistake that people make, and that the priests have made, and that the ministers have made, and that people have made for thousands of years. They don't understand that you can have forgiveness of sins. In other words, you can wipe out the pig, but the rider on top is not wiped out because someone forgives your sins, even God. Because as you do unto others, so will it be done unto you. And that is a part of the law of the Great White Brotherhood. And you know something? You know why people many years ago became Christians? They became Christians because the doctrine taught that Jesus Christ would forgive their sins, and he does. But what they don't understand is that they still have simple Simon to pay. They have to make restitution. Many years ago, high in the Himalayas, one of the great masters was there. And they were having a Vedic ceremony. And at this ceremony, a certain man was standing there. To all appearances and purposes, he was an ordinary man, and he was. And then suddenly, one of the great masters of the Himalayas appeared. He was there, too. And he grabbed a burning brand from the hot fire, scorching flame, and he went over with it and impaled it against the shoulder of one of the men. That very man I was talking about. And one of his disciples was there, one of the disciples of the great master. And the disciple said, how cruel to the master. How cruel. And what was the answer of the master? He said, would you rather have seen him burned to ashes before your very eyes as the decree of his past karma? By a little suffering, he said, the law is satisfied. And therefore, you see, the burning that the master inflicted upon the man was a mitigating of the suffering that otherwise would have come to him as a result of his own karma. He probably burned someone to death in a past life, but had become a good man, was practicing attunement with God in religious services. He was trying to find God, trying to make contact, and as a friend of God, his sins were not imputed unto him to the same degree of intensity. We should understand this is a perfect law in manifestation when we understand it. And it happens to be true. I would like to believe and say to myself, and you know I believe in Jesus Christ. Not only do I believe in Jesus Christ, but I believe in God, and I believe in Melchizedek, priest of Salem, priest of the Most High God. And I believe in all of you. And I believe in all of the world, and I believe in people on other star systems, and I believe that the universe is people with being. I believe in these beings because they are all creations of God. But we have a duality here. They are not only creations of God, and you people are not only creations of God, but you are also creators. You have probably not thought of yourselves as a creator. But it is time that you begin to realize it, because it is in the idea of saying, my life is my own. I'll do what I please. I believe in the doctrine of the forgiveness of sins. Well, so do I. I believe that Jesus Christ forgave Demas upon the cross. And that when Demas spoke to him, and he was the thief, that when Demas spoke to him, he said, verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. I believe this was true. But I feel that behind that veil of paradise, Demas would reach out in consciousness to make right every wrong that he had done, as every man must do. I do not say that God cannot forgive sins, but that's the great hope. That's the great idea that people want. They'll say, oh, the Lord forgave me for everything I did, and then turn around and go out the next day and do the same thing. Isn't that something? Isn't this what happens? Don't they ask forgiveness and then turn around and say the same thing? There are no atheists in the foxholes. As men face death, they begin to recognize that there is something greater, a power greater than themselves. So you see, when you understand this law, and I revealed this to you tonight, whether or not you are able to accept it doesn't make any difference to me in one sense of the word, because I know that it is true. And if you can accept it and believe it, you will have a greater responsibility over your own life. Do you know why? People really love to do just anything they want to do. I heard a woman say in a restaurant the other day, and I've heard it before, and so have you. She says, you know, everything I do is either illegal or fattening or immoral. And so that is the way she went in thought. And, you know, as long as people feel that they can do anything and get away with it, there's an entirely different concept in consciousness. But if people start to realize that all of their acts, all of their thoughts, everything they do is recorded inside of themselves, within them, by that inner computer that is built in, that God put there, that keeps a record of thought and feeling and registers it there. A man goes down the highway and someone cuts across his path. I remember the time that I blew my horn at the man ahead of me until I saw the little old lady walking across the street and she couldn't quite make it. You see what I mean? And people get so mad sometimes that they're ready to kill people because they won't move their car. Isn't it true? I remember one time in Boston. I came in Boston to Highway 9, and as I was coming into Boston, suddenly in this great traffic circle, everything came to a grinding halt. And there I was, looking right into the eyes of a driver who had driven right into my car and stopped. And everywhere I looked, there was cars. And there was no hope, it seemed, of ever unsnarling this terrible traffic tangle. And people were glaring at each other and blowing horns, and it was like a shivaree in June. It was really something. Why? Because everybody got excited and nobody stayed calm. Nobody understood what was going on. But eventually it all disappeared. I imagine 5 minutes went by before it all disappeared. And then it stopped. Why? Well, you see, people can solve their problems, but people cannot seem to solve the problem of impatience. Many of us, in our impatience, are literally losing our souls. We should develop, as an adjunct to finding more of God, a greater measure of God in our life, we should develop the habit of patience to ourselves. Just because you don't become a master overnight, don't give up. For goodness sakes, some of the masters have gone on for 1,000 years. I think it was St. Germain who once told us, he said, my victory was won in 2 million right decisions. He said, my victory was won in 2 million right decisions. He did not say how many wrong decisions he might have made during the time he made those 2 million right ones. So all of us have probably made mistakes. I don't know any people that haven't made mistakes. Otherwise, they haven't done anything. I know a few virtuous people, all right. You know, there's a lot of virtuous people in the church. And of course, I will take the man or woman today who has never heard of God before, or heard of Christ except perhaps as a swear word, and heard of Lord Buddha as an incense burner. And I'll take those people as Christ took Mary Magdalene and made a saint out of her, because I realize that a lot of times the 99 believe so much in their own self-righteousness that they have no room in their being for the righteousness of God. So Jesus Christ Jesus, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all the patriarchs, all the ascended masters, St. Germain, Mother Mary. The John Birch Society says that St. Germain is a devil. Well, if he's a devil, then I don't know what. Because he's one of the greatest and kindest and most loving friends of Jesus that I know of in history. And I wouldn't condemn the John Birch Society or any other society. But they have a mistake in their mind about St. Germain. St. Germain is an exponent of freedom. An exponent of freedom for America. Freedom for everybody. Do you understand what I mean? Personal freedom. But how do you achieve freedom? You have to get free of the ego. And you get free of the ego by non-attachment to the ego. People turn around and they admire themselves so much that they almost break the mirrors as they look into them. And then if they crack, well, then they say, I'm going to have 7 years bad luck. How superstitious are they? Isn't it silly? I mean, really, really silly, some of the things we do. And as Molière, back in France many years ago, made fun of some of the antics of people, so we ought to develop a little habit of making fun of some of our own personal antics and realize that these are not divine in themselves at all. These acts that people do, most of them are ludicrous. And people do them all the time. They just keep on doing the same things over and over again, you know. It's a kind of a bicycle club. Well, you know what I mean. And so people don't really go anywhere. They spin their wheels. And yet, God loves us. Now, one of the great problems with a lot of the self-styled gurus is that they're so busy courting the public and trying to build up a following, a personal following, that they do not understand that all God wants is for people to discover Him. Well, you say, how am I going to discover God? Do I excavate or do I aerate? What do I do? I mean, am I going to take an aerosol can and shoot myself up into the sky? Or what am I supposed to do with myself to find God? Well, this is very silly. It's like someone told me how they had dissected the human body and they couldn't find God in it or even a sign of life. Naturally. They destroyed that when they started the dissecting process. I mean, you can just take things apart. And when you get through taking it apart, there isn't anything left but a bunch of protoplasm. But it is the Spirit that energizes and that fills our body with energy. The healing process that takes place so often here in our midst is a process based upon the presence of God in our life. And God makes people happy. He doesn't make us sad. And if we stopped and thought all about the iniquities that we may have done or probably have done throughout our past life from the cradle to now, we probably might get depressed. And we'd say, well, what chance have I got? Well, dear hearts, remember one thing, and that is the little lump of gold and the great mountain of dirt. What are we concerned with? Something of worth. We may have a little lump of gold in our consciousness, and there may be a big mountain of neglect and dirt standing here. But one day all of that will be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, when the last trump sounds. And people have a mistaken idea about the last trump. They say the last trump's not going to happen during the game, you know, when they're playing cards, but it's going to happen sometime in history. That all at once God's going to speak, and then all the dead people from the time the world began are all going to come up. I don't know where they're going to put them. Right now with all the pollution problems and on this planet and all the other problems, I don't know where they're going to find any space for them. But somehow they believe this, and Christ is going to come on a white cloud. Now, I didn't say He couldn't do this. He can do anything. But that's what they believe in. And then they believe that, well, I guess they believe there isn't going to be any future at all. Because He's going to send them two different ways. You know. Well, it says that. It says He'll separate the sheep from the goats. And I'm going to tell you what I really believe is meant by that. I think the separation of the sheep and the goats is every day. And I think we all stand before the judgment seat of our holy Christ self every day. And the great white cloud is appearing every day. And the great white cloud is the throne of witness in nature itself. Can you look at a cloud? Can you hear a meadowlark sing? Can you gaze into the face of a child? Can you look at people and see the beautiful way in which they are constructed and the wonderful potential in people, the possibility of greatness? Can you look at that and not be moved? Can you say there is no God, there is no balance, there is no justice in the universe? Of course you can. Well then, let's understand that the possibilities that lie within you can be yours today or tomorrow or in the future. You can have it. And you may say, well, I don't believe that. Don't fool yourself. I've had $100 bills multiply right in my wallet. Just because I needed it. I don't know where it came from. All I know is that it appeared. That's only little things. We've had greater miracles than that in our lives here. And these miracles have happened to our people. And they've happened to our members. And they've happened to our friends. Someone may say, I certainly would like to have a friend that could do all these things for me. Well, your God presence can do it. And as I said before, it's not all in miracles, but the miracle of life itself is very great. Don't you think so? Isn't it a wonderful thing that a man can be saturated? Now you take a dried out sponge, and you go ahead with this dried out sponge, and you want to wash the wall. So you go over the dried out sponge and you rub it on the wall, and what happens? Nothing. Maybe a little dust comes down. So you know very well that you got the best solvent in the world, so you put that into the water. And then you put your sponge into the water, and the sponge absorbs. And what does the sponge absorb? It absorbs the water and absorbs the chemical. And then you bring it back to the wall, and you can wash a wall. You have to absorb God. It is not sufficient that He exists in the universe, that He exists in space, that He hallows space. The great masters have told us this. Well, of course, a lot of the things that have happened by the great masters seem so strange and so phenomenal that we say, show me. Well, I can show you the God within yourself, but you have to learn to exercise it. You are the sponge that has to absorb God. And you've got to absorb the water. You've got to absorb all the components of your life that are necessary to clean your world up. We've all got to be cleaned up. Everybody has to be cleaned up. But wait a minute, you say. I thought we were made in the image of God. So we were, but where's that image today? It's either a latent image or we've wiped it off the blackboard. It just isn't there. But it is there. It is the latent image. You just don't see it. Sometimes you don't feel it, sometimes you do feel it. I remember many years ago of going to Pennsylvania to a large meeting there. And as I was there, I met all kinds of strange people. One of the ladies said to me, she said, you know, she said, ever since I began to know about the masters, she said, I just started to tingle. And she says, I tingle all over. And I says, well, that's wonderful. And what does it do for you? Well, she didn't know what it did for her, but she knew she was tingling. And I said, do you want to tingle? And she said, no. So I looked at her and I said, well, you will tingle no more. And at 4 o'clock that afternoon, I met her and I said to her, are you tingling anymore? And she said, no, it's all gone. Well, I said, I told you this would happen, and it has. Because I said it is not necessary to tingle in order to find God. But I'm going to tell you something funny. Perhaps it isn't really funny, but it could be. In other words, if you bring a master into the room where you are, or a master comes into the room, he can make you tingle. From head to toe, or from toe to head. You may, if you're sensitive, if you're keen, if your spiritual sight is open, you may see and feel the presence of the master. But because you don't see or feel the presence doesn't mean that others don't. I remember one time in Washington, D.C., I stood on the platform in the midst of a dictation there, and I was speaking to those people, the people who were gathered there. And suddenly, I felt surrounded with light, and I perceived the light. And the light was very thick, and the light grew thicker, until I could scarcely see the faces of the people. It was difficult to even make out who was sitting in the room. It was just a sea of living light. And then I looked down at my feet, and I was standing about 2 inches off the floor. And no one noticed it. And pretty soon I comfortably came back to the floor, and I walked to the line and received the guests and shook hands with them. And as they passed by, one woman said, I don't like you. Such a courting of people as God does. And yet, people don't like Him. They don't like Spirit. They don't like the presence of God. They don't like the power of change. They'd rather sit down in their old corpses, rotting away. That is true. The potentials of death are in people as the potentials of life are in people. The angels of life and the angels of death are present in people's consciousness. And it depends on whether they choose God or whether they choose to walk in the darkness of their own life. Now, I've always thought it a bit sad that, the ones who know couldn't make the decisions for those who don't know. And then I talked to the Master about that. And he said to me, each one must pass through the door for himself. He said the love of God is sufficient and the grace of God is sufficient for every man and woman. But he said they have to discover this. And he said, what seems to you as a product of inefficiency and a waste of cosmic energy and all of that, he said that doesn't mean so very much, because we are talking about the infinite, about the abundant life. And he said if these people want to fritter away their life without coming to life, he said there's nothing you can do about it because there's nothing God can do about it. And I began to realize that. But he said, you can be a city set on a hill. You can be a light that ought not to be hid. He said, you can raise up the Christ in you. And when you raise up and elevate the Christ consciousness in you, I will draw all men unto me. Not unto you, but unto me. And that's the way it should be. That is why we do not worship personality in this place. Oh, you can look at me as a brutal reed shaking in the wind. You can say to yourself, how good is he? What kind of a man is he? You are not going to find your Creator by finding the answer just in me. It's in yourself. And that is where it starts. You can't come here and sit and gaze at me and become a Christian or a member of the Great White Brotherhood or an adept or a master or anything else that you might want to be. But you can learn of the appearance of Christ within your own world. You can learn about the Christ in yourself. You can start to try to find him inside of you. And if you can't find him in you, then you just keep looking because he's there. I can assure you he's there. You keep looking there. And stop looking elsewhere. We represent the brotherhood. We can speak for them. But that is their conferment. They have given that to us. It is not for the sake of our ego. We're not interested in praising ourselves. We're interested in praising the God within people and raising that God up and restoring harmony and healing and health and wholeness in the whole consciousness of man. Let us decide tonight for ourselves that this can be done. That we can discover a gold mine within ourselves, a gold mine of consciousness. That we can find a new concept of our worth, our net worth. You don't find it in a financial statement, but it's inside of you. And if you will just look, and then as you look, leap into the fire of God. Well, what did he say? I said, leap into the fire of God. Why did I say it? Because it says, our God is a consuming fire. Why? I don't care if this is black or white, I'm just going to use it as an illustration. If you take this little glasses case and move it toward a flame, eventually what's going to happen is they draw nigh to each other. What will happen? It will be destroyed. Matter cannot be destroyed or created, so it'll change, won't it? It'll become a changeling. Changes its form, becomes ashes. If God tonight said to everyone in this room and in that room, you come home right now, Daddy's calling, and you all started heading up, trying to meet God, the consuming flame, you would melt like Icarus with his waxen wings, and you'd plunge to the earth headlong. You know why you'd melt? Because you have not yet received or absorbed or picturized the consciousness of God. You haven't identified with it wholeheartedly. First of all, because you don't realize how great it really is. We're all limited. We have our sense of limitation. So what do we have to do first? We first have to get rid of the sense of limitation and decide that God has a plan. The plan is in the universal Christ by whom he made all things. People confuse this with the identity of Jesus the man. Jesus the man was the Son of God. He had the Christ in him. He had the allness of God in him. So can you. Every one of you can have it. God didn't turn around and just create Jesus Christ and make all the rest of us beggars. He created all of the people on the planet for the same purpose. He doesn't have a favorite son. They're all favorite sons. If it were not so, we would have very little hope. Because if Christ had his way, everybody on earth would have accepted him. And hence they would have all graduated a long time ago. But instead we see the same old Adamic doings that came right out of the expulsion from Eden. The old forbidden apple is still being passed. And people are nibbling away at it just as they did then. And I'm only speaking allegorically. I'm not speaking of a literal apple. But I mean people are still doing the same things they did throughout history. The crime sheets of the modern day paper today might as well have been read in ancient Rome or near Mount Vesuvius. It wouldn't make any difference what part of the earth. The same goings on are plaguing the world. Only today you've got a lot more people. A lot of people get confused about the population problem. They don't understand that this planet has assigned to it approximately 10 billion souls. That out of that 10 billion, 2/3 of them are in the astral or the heaven world awaiting rebirth, while 1/3 are here upon this planet, 3.5 to 4 billion people. And the process is cycling and recycling all the time. People are going and coming. Like the little boy looked under the bed. And he said, Mama, he said, I don't know. He said, you said we all came from dust and we're all going back to dust, right? She said, yes. Well, he said, somebody's either coming or going up under the bed. And that's the way it is. I mean, somebody's either coming or going every minute. And the whole idea is don't take yourself too seriously, but take God very seriously. Take your opportunity very seriously. Laugh at yourself. Learn to laugh at yourself. Learn to smile. Learn to be happy. Learn to not be overly conscious of your human personality. God goes there. Is it a ship that passes in the night? Too bad. You don't have to feel remote from God. God is close. I know that a lot of people today that are in the church, a lot of people today, great preachers, they stand up and they recite a few words for 20 minutes and send the people home, empty of hand, with a few platitudes and popularity for the preacher. I'm not concerned with that. You will never hear from me or any of our people anything that we do not believe to be true or have good reason to support to be true. The truth is within yourself. What you can accept of what we say to you tonight, what you can accept is very important. What you cannot accept is not. If there's anything you cannot accept that I have said it in the spirit of truth and because I know it to be true. Just because you may not know it or have never proved it for yourself does not mean that there is not planned flight. Orville Wright at Kitty Hawk knew that his plane would fly. He believed it would fly and he proved that it would fly. But others throughout the world, until it was proven to them, did not believe in the power of flight. You see what I mean? Many did not. Later they came to it. What we bring, what we teach, is very great in the eyes of God because it is His. But you first have to disabuse your mind of the illusions, the maya, the glamour, the karma, and all of the things that you are going to find in the world and have already found if you only look for them. You may not call these things glamour, karma, and maya. You may not call them illusion. Maybe they're not illusion to you. You say, well, they look very real to me. But let me tell you something. There is much illusion and much fantasy in the world. There is much false idealism in the world. And many of our young people today are being misguided by a false idealism. And ultimately they are going to find ashes in the apple. The ashes of nothingness. I don't say this because a person is young or old. We've all been so young that we've all been babies, and not so long ago. Somehow or other we have the idea that this isn't so. But I was looking at my son today. He's 7 years old. And I said to myself, 6 years ago he was just an infant. And how quickly those 6 years pass. And how quickly the life of a person passes. We have the infancy and the childhood, and then we have the young adulthood, and then we have the person of maturity, and then we have the person of age, and so it goes. It goes very fast. So why should we have any schism between ourselves? We are all children of the light. You may say, well, there are children that are not of the light. True, there are people that have accepted darkness in their world. Darkness is an absence of light. Darkness is not. Darkness cannot remain once the light comes in. And so the life of a man is often gray because he is a mingling of ignorance and wisdom. This makes him a gray one. We adulterate our blackness and our whiteness together, and we get a grayness. People sometimes look for absolute perfection in themselves or others. It's there. But what colors it over is the visions we have of other people. Usually not of ourselves. We always paint that lily pretty white. The lily of ourselves, you know. But in reality, what is most important is that we recognize the infinite care and consideration that God has for us. If you have a feeling in yourself that God doesn't care for you, get rid of it. It is not true. God does care. But you see, this is a two-way street. We have to care just as much about Him as He does about us. So you see, we're stepping up the stairs and stepping up the consciousness. I want to sing a song with you. O love that will not let me go. Number 12. You may stand for this number. As we were singing that last line, I thought, as it was meant to be. I remember playing in a sand pile when my father was digging a basement, when I was a very, very small child, and building little sand castles. And I was thinking then of the world in a level far above even my present day understanding. I remember that. I had thought forms that were brought into my consciousness of a world that was meant to be, of a world of perfection where people had love and kindness and all of this idealism, not as fantasy, but as reality. But somehow or other, as I got older, like Lord Buddha, when he went out into the world and found death and sickness and unhappiness, I began to realize in my search, seeking first the kingdom of heaven, that is what I sought first, I began to realize that there was much that had to be realized of the Holy Spirit. I began to realize that we had a great deal to attain in this world. And then as the years passed to the present time, or I should go back to the time the summit started and even before, I began to realize that the world was in a worsening condition, and yet God is in his heaven. All's right with the world. It's an old saying. God is in his heaven. All's right with the world. So I said to myself, well, I know that's true that God's in his heaven, but all isn't right with the world. You see what I mean? And so it is not. But we cannot be guided by the fact that it's not right with the world. We have to make it right with ourselves. And as this movement is growing every day by leaps and bounds, you know, it's a kind of a fooler here in Colorado Springs. I mean, our membership has grown 5 times or more bigger than it was when we first came here. Oh, far more than that. It's grown probably 10 times, wouldn't you say? 10 times. You keep the records. And it's grown in just 5 years here in Colorado Springs. And all over the world it's grown. It's sweeping the world, even today, and yet the tides of it are not actually recognized among the world. They don't understand that. Because they don't see all the evidences of it. A lot of it is underneath. Our members are not always picked out in the multitudes any more than you pick out Jesus Christ. A lot of our members who have a great deal of light are not perceived as they move in the marketplaces. Because people have eyes and see not. They have ears and they hear not. They have thoughts that do not echo the greatness of God. Now let us make up our minds tonight that we are going to do something for ourselves. And you know what that is? Let go and let God do it. Let go of your tensions, your frustrations, your feelings that somebody's done you wrong. You have the abundant life, and the abundant life is inside of you. But it's there as the land lays. Whether it's in Texas or Oklahoma or in Colorado or where it is in the world, in India, the land lays there. Somebody's got to till it. Somebody's got to plow it. Somebody's got to plant the seed. Somebody's got to water it. And God does the watering in most cases, unless you irrigate. But you've got to have the process go on. And the process, when it goes on to completion, brings the fruit of maturity. Jesus said, by their fruits you shall know them. And so you do. But all do not have eyes to see the fruits. So be at peace. And above all, realize that no matter what turmoil may be brought into this world, the battleground is, as Krishna said to Aruna, the battleground is within us. The light and the darkness struggles within ourselves, within our hearts for recognition. The light or the darkness. How can the darkness that doesn't exist struggle with the light, you say? Well, because, you see, the light becomes darkness if it's misqualified. You misqualify substance and it becomes darkness. And Jesus talked about it. He says, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Think of it. If your eye is single, if you have a single eye vision. And he said, but if the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? So just remember that the misqualification or the qualification factor is what determines. And I wanted to bring this across to you tonight. I realize it is a startling thing to some who have always thought of forgiveness of sins. As I mentioned before, they've always pinned their hopes. Oh, it's so wonderful to be forgiven. You know that even Rasputin, that awful black priest of Russia, at the time the Tsar was being deposed, Rasputin used to say, it feels so good to sin because you can always be forgiven. That is what he said. It feels so good to sin because you can be forgiven afterward, and that feels so good. To be forgiven, to be cleansed. Let us not have that sense. I think the late Edgar Casey made quite a few discoveries along this line on these lesser mysteries and greater mysteries. And of course, it was a shock to his sensitive soul, being a good Baptist. And so we have to understand today that our strength is not in religion in the sense of belonging to some sect. It is in becoming one with God. And this is possible to us all. Blessed Holy Spirit, by thy radiant perfection, draw all souls upon the planetary body to the great light, the light of purpose and true qualification, the light of thy righteousness and thy strength. Let the hearts of men be infused more than ever each day with the radiant dawning of thy coming into prominence in all the affairs of men. Open their hearts and minds, and let there be no emptiness therein, but only the fullness of thy grace. Thy grace is sufficient for every human need. So be it, in God's holy name. Amen. Sign of the heart, the head and the hand to you. May the peace of your presence abide with you, wherever you are, wherever you go. May the glorious peace of your presence flow through days of service and nights of rest. May the peace of your presence keep you blessed. The sign of the heart, the head, and the hand to you.